presentation actually speaks to at least 3 of the leading questions in the program, which are the main challenges faced by the youth. Is it per se the right thing to do to target youth in educational and cultural programs, and which are the structural conditions, rights, and environments required for youth to be listened to engage, and to learn? From Kenya, let's proceed to Indonesia. So I'm a Filipino, but for the last 5 years, up until recently, I've been based in Indonesia, largely working on digital rights, data, and participation and governance, more particularly in the Southeast Asian region. So in Indonesia, sometime in 2016, the current president, also re-elected very recently, said that he aims to be the biggest digital economy in the ASEAN. And that is not without pieces. Why? Because if you look at the figures currently in 2018, for example, there's the digital economy value of Indonesia as a country is $57 billion US. That's not small. And at the same time, there are 143.3 million internet users in the country, generating at least around $5.3 billion US in online transactions. So that's your digital landscape. But at the same time, you have this research that they're saying that there's a very big digital divide in the country. So there's a digital revolution that is happening, but it's not actually happening for all. Indonesia is one of the lowest internet penetration in the region, at around 51%, as of most recent figures. And the use is actually concentrated in more major cities, and cities like, for example, Banda Aceh towards the west, and cities in Papua towards the east are not actually participating in that part of the process. And the recent research of the Web Foundation, where I used to work with, Indonesia ranked only get a 40% rating on what they refer to as women's rights online, ranking very low in internet access and women's empowerment, in relevant content and services, as well as online safety. And you can also see that this actually extends to women of the younger generation. So we conducted a research in 3 countries, including Indonesia, among 14 to 16-year-old girls in school. And we've seen that none of them are aware of their digital rights, though they are very heavy users of social media and the internet. None of them are actually aware of how they can protect themselves better from risk from privacy. And several of them are actually victims of bullying online harassment, as well as disinformation. So, and there is a dilemma with this dream of Jokowi on one hand, and the context of Indonesia on the latter. Because in 2014 also, the Indonesian government removed IT studies in schools, and thinking that digital education can happen in math, in science, in English. They call it mainstreaming digital education. But as you know, with all mainstreaming activities, they either get lost or forgotten in this context. So, together with Goethe-Institut, the PASCH network in Indonesia, we thought about how do we actually think about working with young women and ensuring that they're not only protected from risk of privacy, but they're also able to generate content online and also participate in governance issues within the country. So we thought about this. We call these experiments. We don't call them projects. I just have to separate those 2 things. And we call this experiment Starting Them Young, which is advancing digital literacy for girls in Indonesia. The question largely is how do you make use of current systems and processes and assets, both in the civil society space and also from business and also from government, in ensuring that girls are actually learning digital data literacy at a young age, because the government actually stripped them of that opportunity when they revised the curriculum in 2013. So we went into this project phases, which is understand, design, test, and learn and reflect. And this way, we always have a mantra that's saying, we seek first to understand before we intervene. So the project implementation actually grows heavily from ethnographic as well as survey research. Then we develop our assumptions, design and test them until such time that we're able to get the right formulation, and we implement the project and learn and reflect from it. Okay, so on the understand part, we wanted to understand who is stepping up forward in terms of digital education when government is actually withdrawing from it. And we've seen, for example, that of course universities are there as part of the curriculum in higher education, but you can see that a large portion of that are from community, from NGOs, and professional associations or mass organizations. So that largely constitutes civil society space doing digital literacy work, only second to the universities. Then we've seen, for example, that there's a lot of literacy programs that have been done over the years, and these are done significantly by civil society organizations in the country. From coding, through ICT leadership programs, through innovation jams, and so on, which is practically filling the gap of conducting data and digital literacy education. Now, we've seen also that if you look at the themes that they're working on, there's very little interventions on young women. A lot are done on women's empowerment for those that are actually in the women's organizations, for example, and also economic empowerment for those that are engaging into business. But people that are girls, for example, that are below the age of 16, there hasn't been done so much on that front. And if you can see, there's very less focus on young people in terms of interventions. And if you look at, I'm sorry that this is a slide in Bahasa Indonesia, but if you look at this, for example, this just shows you that there's very low appreciation, there's very high usage of social media, but there's very low appreciation, for example, of how they can actually make use of their skills to be able to create positive content, to participate more meaningfully in their community governance, and also to protect their rights online. So what we actually did is we developed a training program for girls in cooperation with several sectors in several civil society organizations in the country. So what we did was actually we initiated a mapping exercise. So who are the stakeholders in digital literacy? Who are the ones that are actually doing these types of education things across the country? We also did a mapping of expertise. We did a mapping of initiatives from each region to the other, and see who are the ones that we can actually work with in order to advance the digital agenda. There are our other, how do you call it? Our covert agenda as well was to actually bring back the discussion of digital agenda in the curriculum. So we're actually looking at who are those organizations that are actually promoting and advancing digital education to be brought back to the Indonesian curriculum. At one end, we would like to implement a project that actually builds digital literacy for girls. At the other end, we also would like to have a project that actually brings back that discussion to the cultural agenda or to the education agenda. So what we did is actually we partnered with different schools within the PASCH network of Goethe-Institut in the country. We developed a program that is intended for them. We actually did an extensive ethnographic study looking at how they use social media, how they are actually interacting with their phones and so on, what they do when they go home, what they do in schools, and so on and so forth. And then we actually made also a survey on their capacities and capabilities for digital literacy. So we implemented the program. We gave them opportunity to actually play around with the data that government is publishing, because our other objective is actually for them to engage more in civic discussions. So we used the data that the government is actually publishing and made use of that as a way to see what sorts of issues they are actually working on and interested in. So this one is a presentation of their visualization outputs. And these are the ones that came out during the training program. So the winner of because we structured it, we gamed the process. So we brought it as a competition from among the schools. And then what happened was that the second one that you have here, the Women, Her Story, which depicts the history of women empowerment in Indonesia, as the top winner in the exhibit, in the competition. But you can see that there are a lot of, this actually shows you that a lot of concerns of this doesn't only show that, this doesn't only give the students or the young girls an opportunity to create something with data, but it also reveals the kinds of things that they're very interested in terms of discussing. So for example, the one here down below is literacy, and this one is about mental illness. So including suicide rates and so on. So you can see, for example, that the types of issues that the girls are actually interested in are so wide range, from literacy to use of libraries to women's empowerment and to mental illness and so on. So it doesn't only give you a good sense of what they are capable of doing in terms of using their digital skills, but also at the same time, what sorts of issues they're interested in. And the good thing that happened about this process was that it actually led into a action planning exercise on what they would like to do with the issues that they are concerned with. And also we gamed the process. We held an exhibit of their outputs in the public hall of Goethe-Institut in Jakarta. We invited all stakeholders in the community, civil society organizations, educational institutions, and so on, and also ministers in the public education and ICT. Because we have a hidden agenda, you remember? We wanted them to put back education, digital education back to the agenda. So we invited the ministers to come, to see the exhibit, to look at what the girls can do, to see how digital education can promote creativity and also creation of positive content online. And though our activity is actually just part of that long process of advocating for bringing back the digital education curriculum to the agenda, in the end of 2018, and that was last year, the Indonesian government, through its Ministry of Education, decided to bring back digital education to the curriculum. And they are just renaming it to something. They said it's not ICT, but something like communication and technology, something like that, but they brought it back to the curriculum. We thought that the process of actually engaging with government on these issues and ensuring that civil society are getting the push, because during this forum, we have like 17 civil society organizations asking the government, why are you doing this? If you have the goal to make us a digital economy giant in the region, and why is this happening? And that culminated into the process. So as you can see, the experiments are actually designed thoughtfully. The design process was actually 4 to 6 months, making sure that you're actually ensuring that several of the objectives that you would like to do are actually coming into the fore. Now, this is our project journey. Partner selection is critical, school selection as well, selecting the students, designing and implementing and harvesting lessons. This is the full cycle of the project or the experiment. And the last few minutes, I would just like to focus on what lessons have we learned from this project that we will use to influence the design and implementation of similar initiatives. Because currently, we're also talking to the local office of Goethe-Institut in the Philippines to do a similar experiment as well. First one that we did, first of the lessons that we had was that mapping stakeholders and initiatives will reveal the strength or the weakness of non-state actors in addressing different social issues. So if you have a question in mind and you would like to address a problem at hand, it's very important to look into who are already doing this. What are the strengths of doing these things? What are the weaknesses that are there, for example, in terms of advocacy for digital literacy? And we've seen that what was actually lacking in previous initiatives was a creative engagement with government, putting them into a corner in a particular forum that is preceded by an exhibit. Gain that purpose. So it's important, for example, that when we are working with civil society actors, we actually ensure that we have a good understanding of the landscape. We have a good understanding of what the strengths and the weaknesses are. We have a good understanding of what they're capable of doing, what were the approaches that have been done so that we'll be able to get a good sense of what can be done moving forward. The second one that we saw is that collaboration is key. Working in silos will not get non-state actors far enough. So we've seen, for example, that there's a lot of civil society doing advocacy for digital literacy, but they're not actually doing it in a more concerted and in a more unified way. And the project actually was able to get us further by ensuring that each of those players that are advocating for digital literacy in the country is involved into the process. Then we need a government to ensure wider reach and sustainability of digital literacy initiatives. So you cannot go on and live with a how do you call it, with a approach of giving civil society, because at the beginning of this advocacy, government is saying, we're doing well because you, civil society, are actually filling the gap, so we don't need to do it anymore. But what we're actually saying to them that, this is not service provision, is not the job of civil society. You have to take this on your own and you have to put it into policy. So we cannot, sometimes people would think that we can work without government, but I think that's never possible. And finally, and this is something that I would be saying, more particularly for the strategy, funders should be open to experimental projects where goals are clear, but getting there needs adaptive approaches. So we are in the 21st century, but we are using project evaluation tools in the 16th or the 15th century. So the fascination of the log frame is over, please. And I think the German development cooperation actually is moving a little bit on this direction. I could remember very well when we were trying to address the question, how can we use data to prevent the increase of HIV/AIDS incidents in a city very close to Bali. So we were there at the GIZ office in Indonesia, in Jakarta, and I was telling them during the project presentation, if you'd like to ask us what is it that you would like to achieve, we know this is what you would like to achieve. If you'd like to ask us what is it that we do to get there, your specific activities and the results chain, we would say, we don't know. If you're comfortable with that, let's proceed. Luckily, that project got approved. So I think the kind of attitude towards project implementation, the being chained to a theory logic in terms of project implementation really has to change. Thank you very much.